Welcome to the PowerCat Podcast, the original K-State sports show. Now let's go to Kansas City, home of GPC's hidden studio. Here's your host, Cole Carmody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in here to Fighting Ever Fighting. This is the first episode on our new season, season 2 of Fighting Ever Fighting. It's a podcast that we started last year where we catch up with former Kansas State Wildcats. And today, on the first episode of this new season, is none other than Mr. Curry Sexton. Curry does a lot of stuff. A lot of fans might know him for what he does with Wildcat NIL. You might have heard of that. It's kind of a big thing now. It's a pretty big deal. But before his days at Wildcat NIL, Curry was one of the best receivers in really the entire 2000s up to this point. And so, Curry, I know that we introduced you as the man behind Wildcat NIL, but you also have a day job. So what's new in the life of Curry Sexton?
I appreciate the intro, Cole, and appreciate the kind words and for having me on. It's always a pleasure to chat with the folks at GoPowercat. I do have a full-time job. I think that is often forgotten. I hope my bosses don't forget that. I'm actually sporting a logo here from my job. So my wife and I moved back to Manhattan in August. She's from here, and when she became pregnant with number 2, we decided we wanted to get back closer to the grandparents. Her parents live here, and my parents are just down the road in Abilene. So the opportunity to get closer to home, get closer to family was something that was important to us. So we moved back here in August, and the plan was for me to continue to work for my law firm in Kansas City, which I did for a couple of months. But shortly after moving, the Foote family approached me about coming to work for them as their general counsel. And so starting in October of last year, I began as general counsel for Foote Cattle Company. The Footes are major K-State supporters. Actually, I met them through NIL of all things, and established a really good relationship with them. And so now I serve as their in-house attorney for all the legal needs within the cattle side of the operation. And it's been a really great transition for me and for my family, and really enjoying working with good people and good K-Staters.
I think that kind of is your background, right? I mean, K-State through and through. You brought up your hometown of Abilene, and having spent some time in Junction City myself, been through Abilene multiple times. It's a great community. But take me back to your high school days, because for the folks who may not know, Abilene is just down the road from Manhattan off of I-70. Very historic program. There's been a lot of great athletes that have come out of that high school, you included, but it's not exactly a hotbed for Division I talent. So, I mean, how did you end up at K-State, and I guess what turned you into the athlete that you became?
That's a great question. As far as how I ended up at K-State, I mean, that was always the dream. I grew up a big-time K-State fan, family full of K-Staters, grew up going to all the games. And so that was always a dream. It felt like a pipe dream at times. And when football became my primary sport, or I would say the sport that I was best at when I was early on in my high school days, I started to think, okay, maybe there's some potential here. And so after I had a really strong sophomore year, I sent tape to basically every school in the country. At that time, I think Shane Howard from GoPowercat.com and Ryan Wallace made my highlight tape. And we're talking 15 years ago. So it's been a minute, but so we, instead of sending it out via links or Huddle or whatever it was, they created it for me. We put it on a DVD, and then we replicated that DVD hundreds of times. At the time, my uncle, who later became the general manager for the Kansas City Chiefs, was in scouting for the Green Bay Packers. And so he had different connections around the country. So I and my mom, we sent out highlight videos all across the country, but then we also sent it to this gentleman in Pennsylvania, I believe. I don't even remember his name. And then he circulated film up and down the East Coast, and started to get a lot of positive feedback from that. Went to a number of different junior days and different, had different camps, had different opportunities. Started to think, okay, there may be a real possibility here. And so, fast forward through a couple more good seasons. And the future was never really quite certain until the very end. I mean, going into my senior year, I had offers from Wyoming, Harvard, Wyoming, Harvard, Air Force, and a couple other Ivies. And K-State was always just out there. I mean, it was always that possibility. Coach Michael Smith was hard after me, but in light of the Prince fiasco, we had a really significant scholarship issue. He gave out all those scholarships to those heavy JUCO classes, and that later impacted high school classes like mine. I think in our high school class, we had 6 or 7 guys come out of high school and go right on full scholarship. And so the numbers game did not work to my favor. So late in 2009, right, 5-6 months before I was going to graduate, the thought was, hey, we're going to go to the East Coast. We're going to an Ivy League school, not sure which one, but we're going to take a couple visits and we're going to go to an Ivy League school. And then on New Year's Eve of 2009, so heading into 2010, I get a phone call from the then recruiting coordinator, Joe Gordon, who called me and he said, hey, I've got Coach Snyder here with you. Coach Snyder would like to chat with you. And then Coach got on the phone and offered me a gray shirt scholarship, which is something that the Snyder staffs used more frequently probably than others. And so once that happened, it was a done deal. K-State's where I wanted to be. The scholarship opportunity was one that I could not pass up. And so got here. And then how did I be, that was a long-winded answer. It's an interesting story, but how did I become a good athlete? I was always an okay athlete. It was really just the work ethic and the attention to detail is how I became a pretty good player at the collegiate level. There were other receivers on our team and certainly on other teams who were more talented than I was and had better size, better measurables, you could say. But I don't think anybody on the field was ever smarter than me or ever outworked me. And so I think those are the things that really led to my success.
It's interesting that you bring up the recruiting tapes and just how different the recruiting process is now compared to when you were in school. And it wasn't even that long ago in the grand scheme of things. Last season, I talked to Monty Spiller about, his recruiting process, and it is wildly different than, just the exact scenario that you described. I mean, the way that kids are getting these schools interested in them now is just completely different. And it's fascinating to think about a high school class signing 6 and 7 kids because of the scholarship numbers, when now that's really a non-issue. And so that it's crazy how that works. And I guess I wanted to bring this up too, because you do fit in that timeline right after Ron Prince and right at the beginning of Coach Snyder. And so, I mean, there were guys that were still on the team because the transfer portal was not a thing when you were in school. And so there were still guys who were brought in by Ron Prince if they didn't decide to leave. And I guess, one of those guys is Colin Klein. But when you got to K-State, what was it like? I mean, what was Coach Snyder's mentality like, I guess, in his first year compared to in the last year that you were there? Because I can only imagine that second rebuild was in different ways almost as daunting as that first one was, just because of everything that had happened after Ron Prince left.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I was fortunate that I missed the I guess year 1 and year 2 after the transition.
Mm-hmm.
I came in and because I was a gray shirt, I was on the team for the summer of 10, and then I sat out. I was not a part of the team for the Pinstripe Bowl season, and then rejoined the team for good after that Pinstripe Bowl. So I was fortunate that I wasn't a part of some of those first teams from Snyder too, because they said I mean, his intention was to rebuild the culture and to wean out the guys who didn't want to be there. And so we had workouts that were not so fondly known as stations. They were something we did in the winter. Just absolutely grueling workouts, tested your physical endurance, stamina as much as it did your mental. Or your mental as much as it did your physical. And when I was there, we were doing stations twice a week. We were doing them on Mondays and Fridays, and Tuesday, Thursday we did speed work. At the time, it felt terrible. When Coach first came back, they were doing it 4 days a week. So they were doing stations Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And then I think the next year it was 3 days. It was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then he dropped it back to 2. And so So fortunately, I missed some of that transition because I know his objective was, let's get some of these, bad apples out of here. Let's make them work harder than they want to work, and let's get the right guys in here. And I know that was a battle. And I can remember in the early, even when I got on the team in the early days of Snyder too, there were a lot of guys from that Prince era. Obviously not going to name names, but guys who didn't want to be there, who had no business being there, and who in a lot of ways seemed like their sole intention was to disrupt. And fortunately, by the end of my 4 years at K-State, those guys were well in hindsight. And I would say, coach is not the type of person to ever really truly change, which I think is a good thing. So there wasn't a ton of change from start to finish. I mean, some of the things that I just mentioned were differences. But in reality, the program seems pretty similar from day one to my very final day. As a player, I think as you grow, as you become more mature, as you become more of a contributor, more of a leader, I think your relationship with Coach Snyder grows. And so I'd like to think my relationship with him on my last day was much stronger than it was on day one. I think that's a fair statement, but really I think one of his best attributes was his consistency, and I think he was pretty consistent in how he built and maintained his program throughout my tenure.
I think you can draw a lot of comparisons between to what Coach Kleiman is doing right now to especially Snyder 2.0 and the amount of success and the amount of starting at the 8-4s, the 7-5s, and then getting to the double-digit win seasons. I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn there. But I want to bring up your kind of career arc because you mentioned the gray shirt, and as I was looking up some information before our conversation, you played or you received at least statistics, offensive statistics in 4 games. I would assume you're that first year in 2011. You played a little bit of special teams because Coach Snyder was pretty notorious for, if you're going to be on the field, then you're going to be on the field a lot. But when you kind of reflect on that season, and again, kind of the rise of the following season, and then, making it your sophomore season and winning the Big 12 championship, I think a lot of those parallels can kind of be drawn to what K-State has done in the past few years, just talking about the rise. Was there ever a sense of like, wow, we know we're on the cusp of something special after that 2011 season and then preparing for that 2012 season?
Yeah, for sure. I think that 2011 season was interesting, both for me personally and for, from a team perspective. I came in the spring and I had a really good spring, really productive spring, but we had a really solid receiving group. Broderick Smith pre-injury was one of the best players that I ever saw during practice. Chris Harper, obviously we know how Chris's career ended up. Tremaine Thompson, obviously a really good college player. Sheldon Smith, who you may not remember as well, really good player. And then obviously in came a guy by the name of Tyler Lockett that summer. So we had a really good receiving core. And so I went through all of spring, had a great spring, went through summer, had a great summer, went through fall camp, and was on all 4 special teams. I think it was 3 or 4 days before the opening game against Eastern Kentucky. Coach brought me in and said, I want to redshirt you. And at that point, I was dead set on playing. And if you go through a full Snyder offseason, the last thing you want to do is hear, hey, you got a full year before you ever see the turf. And so we had a lot of discussions that me and Coach Snyder, me and Coach Smith, me and different coaches, my family, trying to figure out what's the best path forward. And ultimately, I made it very clear that I want to play. And Coach said, I think, he referred to Monty Beisel and said, Monty's a guy that I think if he would have redshirted and stayed another year, he'd have been a high draft pick. And I made it clear, Coach, I've come this far. I want to play. Because granted, at that point, I had already sat out for essentially 2 years. Mm-hmm. So redshirting meant another, and that meant 6 years and graduating at 24. And so I ended up, playing and ended up playing mainly special teams. And then as the season went on, Broderick got hurt and dealt with a couple off-field things. Tyler had some injuries. He got injured at Oklahoma State, and so I was thrust into more playing time. Had a couple catches against in the 4 overtime win against Texas A&M late in the game. But then I ultimately also got hurt that season, broke my collarbone late in the year. and missed a couple of games. So it was an interesting year for me. But yeah, some of my contributions certainly don't show up on special team or on the stat book from that year. But as a team, I mean, go back to that Eastern Kentucky game and coming off the Pinstripe Bowl year, Pinstripe Bowl season, an okay season, I think 7-6. Had a good offseason at that time. Nobody knows who Colin Klein is. There was still some controversy as to who was going to be the quarterback, Colin or Sam Lemur. And I think there was even some split between our coaching staff as to who they thought was the guy. And then we go out and almost get beat at home by Eastern Kentucky. Late game, long TD pass from Colin to Chris Harper wins it. And so I think after that we thought, oh man, this team we're not going to be very good. Fortunately, we went right into a bye week after that first game, which we hated at the time, but in retrospect was probably the best thing to ever happen to us. Colin became more entrenched as the guy, go on and beat Kent State really soundly, and then go down to Miami and win in that crazy, with that crazy finish, which felt like a huge upset. In reality, it wasn't, but it felt like it. Yeah. And then we had a season full of really close games, close victories, close losses. We pulled out a lot of games that we probably shouldn't have won, and ended up going and playing a better Arkansas team in the Cotton Bowl. But overall, a really, really strong year, 10-3. Nobody saw it coming. And then, we returned everybody for the most part, going from that 11 season to 12. And the feeling was just different. We had, you have Colin Klein returning, you have Tyler Lockett returning, John Hubert returning, Chris Harper, Tremaine Thompson returning, several offensive linemen returning. You had Arthur Brown returning, Nigel Malone, Bubba Chapman, Ty Zimmerman. I mean, the core was there. And so, you just knew going into that offseason that if things go the right way, this is going to be a really strong year. And I don't remember where we started the season ranked. We were I want to say top 20, but we knew that was not anywhere close to where we needed to be. And so it was just a slow climb up to number 1. And obviously we know what happened from there, but just a truly special team with a lot of really good football players who probably should have played for a national championship.
And, it leads me right into my next point with not only the redshirt rules, but now the expanded playoff. You talked about your freshman season of should I redshirt? Should I play? What do I want to do? I mean, if you copy and paste your career in today's college football, there's a good chance that you could have kept your redshirt and still played. We've seen K-State use that a lot with kids who, maybe they're not fully ready to be starters, but they're going to be able to contribute. And if somebody gets hurt, then they can, quote unquote, burn that redshirt and use up those 4 games. I think the NCAA has done an amazing job. There's not a lot of things that the NCAA has done amazingly over the last few years, but that's one of the things that I think has really benefited the student athletes. I mean, again, I think that's made for somebody, a story like yourself, getting and talking about, that 2012 team, the expanded college football playoff, now in today's, realm of college football. How really good was that 2012 team? Because I think folks all around the country still to this day will argue that if you guys win that game against Baylor, then you probably win the national championship. We know that Alabama was a really, really good team that season. But, I mean, how much different could the season have gone had you had the expanded playoff then?
Yeah. I mean, have we had the expanded playoff? I mean, who knows? It all depends on the luck of the draw at that point. I think to me the what could have been is more so just what could have been had we not suffered a slew of injuries in the Oklahoma State and TCU games leading up to the Baylor game. We had Colin Klein suffered a concussion against Oklahoma State. It took him a little while to recover from that. Tyler Lockett broke his high ankle sprain against TCU. We lost a starting guard to a broken foot in pregame warmups. Ty Zimmerman broke his leg against TCU. I was not as important as those guys. I broke my collarbone against TCU. So all of a sudden we go from a juggernaut, a team that just went on the road and blitzed a really good TCU football team, to a team that goes to a really hot Baylor team without probably your most important defensive player, not your best, but your most important defensive player. And you plug in a true freshman at safety who's had little playing time to face a really high-powered offense. And then you take your most explosive playmaker off of offense, and he hardly plays against Baylor the next week. Your quarterback is not in rhythm like he was several weeks prior. So it was really just a perfect storm of really, really unfortunate circumstances against leading up to that Baylor game. That Baylor team was horrible early in the year and then got super hot late. A lot of talent on that football team. So to me, the what could have been is, or shoulda, coulda, woulda scenario is just what, if we could have stayed healthy, what would we have done? And I have zero doubts that if we were a healthy football team, we go win at Baylor, we come back home, we beat Texas, and then we go play Notre Dame in the championship. And I think we would have been the better football team. And that 2012 team was loaded, and I think that's often forgotten. People talk about the best Snyder teams ever, and some of those late 90s, early 2000 teams are rightfully brought up. But that 2012 team, again, I already went through some of the names, but Colin Klein, Heisman runner-up. John Hubert, one of the best running backs in Snyder 2, Tyler Lockett, Chris Harper, both NFL receivers, both NFL draft picks. Travis Tannehill, one of the best tight ends that we had in Snyder 2. Then on the offensive line, you had Cornelius Lucas, in his 10th or 11th year in the NFL. Cody Whitehair going into year 9 in the NFL. You had B.J. Finney, who played 6 or 7 years in the NFL. Then you had Tavon Rooks out at right tackle, who was an NFL draft pick. And then you had a couple other, Boston Stuyvesant mixed in there, who had an opportunity in the NFL. Then on defense, you had Meshach Williams, who was defensive lineman of the year in the Big 12. You had Arthur Brown, second-round NFL draft pick, maybe the best defensive player that I ever saw. You had, I'm trying to think of all the other guys. Justin Tuggle played in the NFL for several years, then went on, played in CFL for a number of years. Ty Zimmerman, maybe the best safety that we had at K-State and Snyder 2, would have had a long career in the NFL if not for injuries. Bubba Chapman, Nigel Malone, maybe the best cornerback duo that we had at K-State and Snyder 2. Just a really, really, really good football team with really no holes, and those holes really weren't exposed until we suffered those really key injuries late in the season. And so, disappointing. It was certainly a disappointing end of the season because we felt like we were the best team in America. So really, try not to think too much about what could have been, because I think what could have been is would have been pretty special.
We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors. Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
I think every single team, at least in the modern era of K-State, with Chris Kleiman at the helm, will be compared to that 2012 team. I mean, that is the standard for teams that want to try and get to that level. I think that's only right for those teams to be compared to that team, because they were, as you mentioned, incredibly talented. I mean, people do forget the amount of individual talent that actually was on that team. How many Ring of Honor guys that you just mentioned, or guys that will be in the Ring of Honor one day. And so a very talented group, which then leads into 2013. And, you go from 2012 to 2013, and there's a lot of change. And specifically at the quarterback position, you bring in Jake Waters, who, again, probably one of the most underappreciated quarterbacks, I think, in K-State history. He had the burden of following up one of the greatest quarterbacks in Colin Klein. Here comes Jake Waters, a guy at Iowa Western Community College, who, he's got 2 years to play, but in his 2 years set some amazing records. And behind him, you have another kind of quarterback in Daniel Sams. And so that first year, it very, very reminiscent of what K-State just went through with, maybe not a quarterback controversy, but everybody has an opinion on who should be playing. Is it Jake Waters? Is it Daniel Sams? Or is it Avery Johnson? Or is it Will Howard? As an outsider and now an insider, really, could you see comparisons this year between what happened with Will and Avery to what you saw firsthand with the quarterback situation in 2013?
Yeah, I think to a degree. This year obviously was, factually completely different. I mean, you had your starting guy returning after he led the team to a Big 12 championship and a Sugar Bowl appearance. You had an 18-year-old freshman phenom in there, competing against one another. Clear-cut guy going into the season. For the first part of the season, there was no doubt who the guy was and was going to be. Obviously, some controversy was created later in the year, especially after the Texas Tech game, but not exactly the same. Because going into 2013, we went through an entire offseason with that controversy. Controversy within our coaching staff, within our locker room, within the media, within the fan base. There was a split from January 15th of 2013 until Jake cemented himself as the guy sometime in the latter part of that season. That team that, obviously we lost a lot of key pieces. That was still a really good football team. Obviously eight wins, that in my 4 years, 8 wins was the least we had. And that's, I think that says something about that 4 year stretch. What happened going into 2013, I think 2011 and 2013 had some parallels in my mind, and the term and the controversy between Colin and Sam and Jake and Daniel wasn't exactly the same. But in my view, had we picked Jake earlier on, that 2013 team would have been more successful from the jump. There was, and that's no discredit to Daniels. Daniel was a great player, but for that team, Jake was the best option because you had Tyler Lockett, you had Tremaine Thompson. We had good weapons. You had really, really good, John Hubert was still on that football team. We had really good players. And so I think Jake was just better suited to be the guy for that football team. Any team with Tyler Lockett is better suited to have a guy who can chuck the ball around the yard. And so I think that team suffered. We got off to that 2-4 start. I think we suffered because of that. A, because of the quarterback issue. Two, B, because of again, injuries. The North Dakota State, just an incredibly unfortunate series of events. We had a 14-point lead, at some point in the third quarter, and blew that, gave that up, and then gave up a 16 or 18 play drive to lose last second. Go to Texas, good football team, great football game, losing a close one. Then we go to Oklahoma State. We trot Jake out for the opening series, and then he doesn't play a single snap the rest of the game. Tyler gets hurt at some point during that game, doesn't play again. And then I believe Tremaine Thompson also got hurt, didn't play again. So we're playing from behind with a guy who's not a throwing quarterback, with myself as the number one receiver on the field, which admittedly is terrifying. And then I think it was Terrell Miller and Kyle Klein as the other receivers out there. Not a recipe for success. Then we come home to Baylor the next week. Jake and Daniel continuing a split time, although Daniel played more against Baylor than Jake did, with, again, that same receiving core of me, Terrell, Kyle Miller, or Kyle Klein. I don't even know who else, and almost beat that Baylor football team. And so by the time that we got into the middle part of the season, we picked Jake. We went with Jake, and Tyler and Tremaine came back. We ended up going 5-1 down there, or 5 or 6-1 down the stretch. 6-1 down the stretch. We went from 2-4 to 8-5. And so, to me, I think that season could have gone much differently had we just stuck with a guy, and then obviously had we not suffered a couple key injuries.
Talk to me about Jake's game a little bit, because we talked to Jesse Ertz last season. We've talked to other quarterbacks before on this show. We talked to Will Howard, but Jake's game is so, again, I say underrated, but I don't even know if he's underrated, because you look at his statistics, and the statistics are incredibly good. I mean, it doesn't take much. You just go look at your senior season, Curry, and the statistics that you put up, in large part, to the quarterback. I'm sure that you would say that same thing. I mean, Jake's ability to spread the ball around and really make those throws that K-State hadn't had a quarterback been able to make. I mean, Colin, obviously, we know what kind of quarterback he was. He was not known for his sitting back and throwing the ball 30 to 40 times a game. And look at Jake Waters' box score, and he did that. Talk to me a little bit about his game and maybe his leadership style, which obviously has helped him transition into the coaching side of football very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jake's only problem was that he was a passing quarterback in a system that otherwise wasn't, that wasn't the ideal quarterback. That wasn't who Bill Snyder envisioned as the guy running the show. So you think about Jake sandwiched in between Colin, Daniel to a degree, Jesse Ertz, Skylar Thompson a little bit later. Skylar was more like Jake, but he was sort of the outlier. He was the guy who could do what most of the other guys couldn't. And that was make every throw out there. Jake wanted to be a guy that stood in the pocket and just ripped defenses apart with his arm. And that's what he was capable of. And I think it took a little bit of time for the coaches to adjust the offense to that, to say, okay, we're not going to make this throwing quarterback a runner, and we're going to build an offense around him because we have good weapons around him. But I think he is underrated. Obviously, the statistics show that he shouldn't be, but I think that he has a couple things fighting against him. One is there was, in my mind, irrationally, there was a lot of fans who still think and thought that Daniel Sam should have been the guy again, ludicrous. You had Tyler Lockett on the field. And I love Daniel Sams. He's a great person, and I love the heck out of him as a teammate, good player. But Jake Waters was the best quarterback for the 2013-2014 teams. And then the second one was again just the fact that he wasn't what K-State fans are used to as a quarterback at Kansas State. And so I think a lot of people have overlooked him over the course of the last decade and forgotten what kind of talent he was. To me, he's a lot like Ty Zimmerman, in the fact that if Jake didn't get hurt our senior season and have to get surgery right when the season ended, he's a guy who finds his way onto an NFL roster and probably is on a roster for 8 or 10 years because he's a really smart dude. He's a football junkie and he's a really good player. Can really throw the football around the yard and can do so without making mistakes. And so I think that injury he suffered against Oklahoma in 2014 ultimately impacted the trajectory of his career.
And, you talk about 2014 again. I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but again, looking at your particular box scores, your senior season, I want to say 5 or 6 games of over 100 yards receiving, multiple games with, more than 10 catches. You guys had a really good connection. Just how fun was that year, not only for you personally, but as a team? Because you said, the parallels there, that 2014 team had a lot of success.
Yeah, it was incredibly fun. I mean, I never expected that. I expected to have more production than my junior year, where I think I had 40 catches, but I didn't expect to have 80 catches and 1,000 yards by any stretch. I think Jake and I were roommates for his 2 years at K-State. Really good friends, still really good friends to this day. Actually, was up in Omaha last weekend for his wedding. With Tyler and others as well. And I think the rapport that I had with Jake and the rapport that Jake and Tyler and I all had together was a huge, lent itself to the success that we had. I was also a beneficiary of the fact that Tyler Lockett was unguardable. And so defenses had to really focus on him and try to find a way to stop him. And so I was often left with one-on-one matchups and was able to abuse those in certain ways. And then ultimately, we were, that 14 team was sort of the antithesis of a Snyder football team. We were horrible at running the football. We had no run game. And so Tyler and I and Jake were beneficiaries of that. I mean, I tell people all the time, when joking about that season, I point them to the West Virginia game late in the 2014 season. We go to West Virginia on a Thursday night, early November, play a decent West Virginia football team. And we ended up having 1 yard of net rushing that game. And Jake threw for 399 yards or 400 yards, and we won the football game. I don't think you could look at any Snyder box score from his entire tenure at K-State and find a game where they had less than 50 yards rushing and won the game. And we had 1. And so I think that, that year was just, it ended up for me personally, and I think for Jake and Tyler too, ended up just being, that, again, I'm going to use the phrase perfect storm. It ended up being a perfect storm of events just to lead itself to us being a predominantly passing football team. And it was a ton of fun. I mean, just to have some of the moments that we had and that I had, I mean, to have a game against Auburn on Thursday night, ESPN prime time, where, 10 or 11 catches for 130 yards against a top 5 team, to make SportsCenter top 10, after the Texas Tech game, and I think make it again later in the season. And just to have the kind of season that you dream of as a kid is not something that I expected, never envisioned, but I'm certainly grateful for.
I think it's pretty cool when you look back, and your story is definitely not unique of local kids at K-State flourishing. So many instances of kids from the state of Kansas who are able to take that next step at K-State and become significant contributors. And not too often, and it's not too rare, I should say, that guys just like you who maybe be sneaking on a blue shirt, sneaking on a gray shirt, by the time they get to be a senior, they're having significant contributions. I mean, K-State is a developmental program, and we see that time in and time out. But that brings me to my next point of conversation here, Curry, is in today's modern world of college football, it can be very hard to have that developmental program. I always wonder when we have these conversations with guys. I mean, when you were playing, was there ever any thought of, had the transfer portal been around, was there ever any thought of, man, I don't know if this is for me. Like, do I want to be here for 4 years? I mean, did you have those thoughts? And I mean, heck, if the transfer portal was around, maybe not necessarily you, but how different do you think the roster may have developed at K-State in your time there?
Yeah, those are thoughts that I haven't given a lot of thought to, honestly, but they're great questions. I think, it's you're right. I mean, K-State's always been, and I think will continue to be, a developmental program, but you wonder how much the transfer portal is going to affect that. You think of, I mean, I'm just shooting from the hip here. I don't know. This is complete conjecture, but you think of, we have some young receivers on this year's football team, local kids too. I mean, you think of Sterling Lockett, you think of Andre Davis, some guys who have been, Sterling for a couple, Andre for one, guys who have been in the program for a year or two, and maybe in pre-portal years would be ready to make an impact. Well, that sounds great, but then after last season, you think, man, we have a need for another receiver. You've got a couple really good ones in Keegan and Jace, and decent backup in Jaden Jackson. We need to go get another guy. So then you go get an impact player out of the portal, and Dante Cephas, and all of a sudden those guys are about the same place on the depth chart that they were last year, if not lower. And so you wonder how. I have wondered how would I have, as a guy who I think, I'm trying to go off memory, but I think freshman year, I think I had 4 or 6 catches. Sophomore year, 11 catches. Junior year, 39 catches. Senior year, I think 79 catches. How does my developmental path, how does my growth, how does that get impacted by the portal? My guess would be that after sophomore year, where the top 3 receivers returning are Tyler Lockett, 5'11", Tremaine Thompson, 5'8", Curry Sexton, 5'11". I'm not probably the third guy going into 2013, because they're going out and getting a big guy to go out and make, to go out and get, catch passes, get, jump balls, whatever it may be. Same thing going into 14 after we lose Tremaine. Chances are I'm probably not the number 2 guy going into the 2014 season, because again, Tyler and I were not big guys in stature. And so you wonder, what does my career look like in today's world? And it's certainly interesting to think about. But I think it's fair to assume that it wouldn't be the same. And so, those are really interesting thoughts. And I think it differs with football and basketball.
Yeah.
I think with basketball, you're never going to see a developmental program again. And it's unfortunate for both the players and the fans, because you're never going to see those tight-knit locker rooms, those fan bases who really invest in the guys, invest in the Shane Selthow, Thomas Gibson, and Jacob Pullen. You're never going to see that sort of buy-in between from the fan base to the player and the player to the fan base. Fortunately, I think you will continue to see that with football, just because of the sheer roster size and the cost of the turnover. And so I think we're going to continue to see some development at K-State. I mean, we're seeing it every year. Guys like, Michael Capria, Sam Hecht, who are going to get a lot of playing time, Andrew Linegang, John Pastore, these, guys who are going to get a lot of playing time this year on the offensive line. Garrett Oakley's a developmental guy to a degree. I think guys like Austin Romaine, Jack Fabris, Jacob Parrish, Keenan Garber, all are going to be developmental guys to a key. Maybe not Parrish. That's probably not the right one. Brendan Mott's a developmental guy. Cody Stuff will be the developmental guy. There's a lot of key guys on this roster this year who will be developmental guys. And so I think you're going to continue to see that. And I hope so, because I think history shows that having experienced guys is always key. And I'll say, from a personal perspective, we were up at Jake's wedding this weekend, and I have a close-knit group of about 7 guys who I talk to every single day and have for 12 years now. Jake and Ryan Mueller, Zach Nemechek, Leighton Dowling, Zach Trujillo, Weston Hebert. I know I'm leaving somebody off, but we talk every single day. And we were up at Jake's wedding last weekend, and somebody made the comment like, man, it's sad to think that guys these days aren't going to have these types of relationships, because the 7 guys who form a bond early in college aren't going to be all at the same university by year 4. And that's unfortunate to think, just because there's so much positive, so much good that comes from, from completely unrelated to football, so much good that comes from being in a Division I football program, Division I program of any kind, and battling through those years together, those tough times, those good times, and coming out on the other side. So that's something that I've given a lot of thought to as well. And it's unfortunate that we won't see that as much moving forward.
All great thoughts. I mean, you say Division I program. How about just university in general? I mean, if
Yeah.
we take it even on a wider spectrum, right? I mean, you guys got to experience what K-State was like when you were 18, and you got to experience what it was like when you were 21 and 22 years old. And it changes you. And I'm firsthand account of that, right? Grew up in Kansas City and moved to Manhattan, and it's changed my life. No doubt about it. Before I let you get out of here, man, first of all, congratulations on everything that Wildcat NIL has been doing recently. Watching from afar and covering these athletic programs, it really is and very impressive what you guys are doing in the NIL space. And maybe for those folks who might not be too familiar, would you give us an update? I know there was a milestone that was just reached not too long ago, and kind of where are you guys at in the larger scale of the NIL world right now?
It's a great question. I think we're in a really good position. We certainly better than we were 8 months ago. I guess for just brief history, we started this thing about just a little over 2 years ago. And for the first 18 plus months, we were moving progressing very, very slowly, kind of doing everything ourselves, no direct partnership with athletics or the university. That all changed in late January, early February of this year after our football program lost a couple key guys because of NIL. Coach Kleiman embraced it. Gene Taylor embraced it. The school embraced us as the official NIL partner of K-State athletics. And since then, we've really been all hands on deck, and we've hit the ground running. We spent the spring months getting out and engaging with our larger donor base, trying to raise as many dollars as quickly as we could to get our various teams what they think they need to be competitive, in building and retaining rosters. And we feel like we've done a good job of that. And then the next phase of that was to launch officially our grassroots campaign, which was to engage with as many people from the collective fan base as we could. And so we announced that in early March. And that's a part of our fan membership, or that's through our fan membership platform. We have fan memberships available for people with sorry about that. We have fan memberships for anybody with from $9 or $10, 25, 40, and $90, $250 a month. And it's a way for the fan base to get involved. People who can't write that 6-7 figure check. And so we started on March 8th, I believe we started with 341 members. And then we progressively grew and grew and grew. I think we unlocked gifts of 100 to 50, 500, and $1 million along the way. And the $1 million gift was unlocked when we hit 1,000 members. And I believe we hit 1,000 members sometime in the latter part of April. Or early part of May. And so just a way for, and that was something that was super important to Coach Tang, but a way for us to, we were engaging the larger donors. Now let's engage the collective fan base, and let's show both of them that we're trying to get everybody involved, because it's going to take, a collective effort to make this thing go. And so we feel really good about where we're at. Obviously, we went through the football portal. We lost one guy, one scholarship guy, third string defensive tackle. We feel really good about that. The coaches feel really good about where their roster's at. We were able to go out and add a couple key pieces. Basketball, a lot of turnover, and that's just how basketball is always going to be. But I think the coaches feel really good about where that roster's at. I think our women's basketball team feels really good about where their roster's at. I think our volleyball team is in a really good spot. And I think, we're seeing, some of the effects of NIL with our baseball program making its first regional in a decade. And NIL was a big part of keeping that team together. And so, we feel really good about where NIL is at K-State. Now, as NIL does, it's changing. And so I think, unless you live under a rock, you probably saw some announcements within the last couple of weeks about a settlement and a massive class action lawsuit that's going to further change and drastically change the collegiate athletics landscape. And so, we're going to see over the course of the next 13, 14 months, we're going to see more significant changes that are going to really change things. And so I don't know where this thing is going. I don't know what role Wildcat NIL will have, if any, in a year, 13 months from now. But I know I regardless if we're involved when revenue sharing becomes a thing or not, I think we can rest feeling good about what we did to contribute to success at K-State in this window of let's call it the wild, wild west of NIL.
It is the wild, wild west. And Curry, I know you got stuff to get to. First of all, thanks so much for joining me. This has been a great conversation. I've always loved everything you guys do at Wildcat NIL, and personally, just watching those teams when I was younger, it made me want to be around K-State. So always a good chatting with you. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Like I said, I know you're a busy man, so I'll let you get back to it. But good luck with everything with your career. Again, apparently you have a career. I don't know. That's just, you got to talk to people. You're a very busy man. But thanks for taking the time out, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Cole. Appreciate it. Go Cats.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.